Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming along to our session today, which is hopefully going to be really helpful for supporting you with any sustainability missions you have in your churches, but also helping you with a little bit more of a deeper understanding of how to start the journey to net zero. If you do have any questions or need some help and support on any part of this presentation today, do note two things. One of them being that we will send a copy of the presentation out in a PDF format, so you can print that off if you need to. And if you do have any questions that you would like me to support you with, please feel free to contact me on the email address, which we will share post session today. So to start off with, a little bit about me. So my name's Emily Berry. I'm the Partnership Manager at Utility Aid, and a large part of my job is working with our different partners in how we can support organisations like yourselves with things like sustainability and energy procurement. Today's session is going to be about what are the advantages of net zero planning, what are the challenges, and how can we overcome these challenges together. So to start off with, who are Utility Aid? If you don't know who we are already, we are an energy consultancy and brokerage, and we're passionate about helping organisations become greener, save time and save money on their energy. Wanted to start today's session off because it is linked to what we're going to be going through today with a market update. So at Utility Aid, we get asked all the time about what's going on in the markets, when's the best time for me to shop around for my renewal. And this is a graph here that shows you the history of wholesale oil, gas and power prices since around April 2023. And the reason I'm showing you this is because it gives you a little bit of guidance into when's the best time to shop around for any upcoming renewals, but also to just give you an overview of how net zero can have an impact, a positive one, on any running costs that you have in your church or buildings. So to give you a quick overview, oil prices finished the year lower than expected for the second year running, which is great, but gas and electricity prices are still being impacted by concerns over supply and storage in the UK and also in Europe. How the remainder of the winter pans out will be vital in predicting what future prices will look like. And the concern at the moment is supply and demand balance remains really, really tight. So essentially what we could be seeing is some spikes throughout February and also throughout March. And it's very dependent on things that are quite fragile. So like how the weather's going to change, is there going to be any impacts politically or geopolitically? So if you've got any questions on energy markets and things to look at, please feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to help. So net zero planning. What are the benefits of net zero planning? Now, most of you will know most of these. One of the obvious ones is cost. You need to keep an eye on your organisation the same way you do when it comes to your energy use at home. It's not just good for the environment, but it can make a big financial difference too. The less you're using, the less your costs will be. Environment. So the term net zero refers to the target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions that cause global warming. By achieving net zero, we hope to reduce the global temperature back to safer limits through carbon removal. And acquire and retain. This is something that I think we've seen more and more people look into in more depth, especially over the last 5 years or so. What we're talking about here is how funding organisations pursue you, but then how also you can attract people to be more engaged with your organisation. So adopting carbon neutral practices may enhance your reputation and attract and keep people engaged. So organisations pursuing a net zero transformation are more likely to keep people engaged because the people connected to the organisation feel good about its impact on society. Getting started. So how do you start this journey and what areas should you look into first? The first step is looking at what your current carbon footprint is. For those that don't know, a carbon footprint assessment involves measuring and quantifying greenhouse gas emissions from both direct and indirect sources. There's a couple of considerations to think about, and this process can be a little bit complicated. So it's crucial to have a clear, defined system for calculating your emissions, which typically include things like electricity and gas usage, fuel consumption in organisational vehicles, and things like that. And there's a couple of other things to think about as well with this process. It's not a one-time task. It's an ongoing process that will require regular updates and changes to echo the progress you've made and your emission reduction goals. But you don't need to tackle everything at once. As I've said earlier, it's a complex task, and there are 3 different scopes that you need to look at once you've done your carbon footprint. And this is what we're going to look into next. So you've done your carbon footprint. Now, this should be done by somebody ideally who is a qualified energy assessor. We do have them at Utility Aid. We've got very experienced head of the department. But if you want to have a little starting point, there are some online tools that you can use for your carbon footprint. Once you've got an idea of what your current carbon footprint is, you can then move on to where to get started in making reductions. And that falls down to scopes 1, 2, and 3. And this is a way of us categorizing the different kinds of carbon emissions an organization creates in its own operations and also in your wider value chain as well. So we're going to take a quick look at what these are and what they involve. So Scope 1 emissions covers the greenhouse gas emissions that an organization makes directly. So, for example, that would be things like the carbon emissions that are put into the atmosphere while you're running your boilers or any vehicles that you may have. And then we fall onto Scope 2. And these are emissions organisations make indirectly, like when they're running their electricity or the energy it buys for the heating and cooling of its buildings is being produced on its behalf. There's a couple of things here in Scope 2. One of the easiest ways that you can become greener is by having a green energy tariff. Now, I know there's a lot of conversation about how do you know if something is actually green. And the best thing to do is when you're shopping around is look at the credentials online and see if that person can tell you where that energy has come from and what are the sources of generation. Again, if you need any help with that, please do let us know. Which takes us on to Scope 3, which I've done in a separate piece here because Scope 3 is quite a big stage. So ideally, just to recap, the stages that you'd want to look at is your carbon footprint first. Once you've got that in place, you can start tackling the easier stuff, which is in Scope 1 and 2, stuff that's easily within your control that you can look at. And then Scope 3 is where it gets a little bit tricky because in this category, you're looking at all the emissions associated, not with the organisation itself, but the organisation it's indirectly responsible for up and down its value chain. Now, for example, that could be things like the products you buy and what those suppliers are up to in terms of their net zero journey. And then you need to also have a look at in terms of the things that you're buying for your organisation. Some of them, the difference it will make for you making that change won't be as big as other things. So it's really important to kind of pull down a list of all the different things associated that you buy for the building and then review those that are contributing the biggest emissions. But remember, you don't need to tackle this stage until you've completed at least scopes 1 and 2. It's really important that when you've done a carbon footprint assessment, that you think about your carbon reduction goals. So we talk about this a lot at Utility Aid, and a lot of people ask, why is it important for me to set a goal? It's a crucial step for achieving net zero or carbon neutrality. And it's important that these goals are realistic and achievable whilst being ambitious. So sometimes a lot of people are using the SMART method. If you've heard that, it's a widely recommended approach. If you don't have goals in place, it makes it really difficult for you to then plan when you're going to achieve things by, bring people on board, and also think about any sort of goals that you're going to set in the future as an organisation. You need to have goals in place to make sure that those are put in place in timely fashion. Which then takes us on to the top tips section. So at this point, we know that the key stages of going to a journey of net zero is, first of all, knowing what you actually are consuming. and what your emissions are for your organisation. And once you have that, you can then plan all the different areas of your organisation where you can make a positive change and start having targets on board. But one of the things we've not talked about is how you can create a culture and bring people on board this journey that you're putting in place. We talk about creating a culture all the time at Utility Aid, and our usual recommendation for this process is to think about setting people as energy champions. So energy champions are responsible for communicating the message of what you're trying to achieve, why you're trying to achieve it, and what are the benefits for everybody in you trying to achieve this. Now, it could be something as simple as, if we achieve these goals, it means that we're going to reduce our running costs by this much a year, which means that we'll be able to put this much money back into the community or back into community projects that we're holding. Keep communicating about the differences you're making financially, environmentally. And I would honestly consider putting an energy champion in place if you can. Putting an AMR on your wish list. So these are things that are going to aid you in this journey, along the journey of net zero, and kind of make it a little bit easier for you to achieve the goals that you've set. So an automated meter reading device is different to a smart meter because it lets you review your consumption in both operational and non-operational times. So this gives you the ability to understand the business patterns and help you make better decisions on saving money. So sometimes what we've seen with organisations, if they have an AMR fitted, they can then start to notice any changes or any anomalies in their usage that don't look quite right, and it gives you the ability to then make changes internally to your organisation. It could just be something as simple as switching something off at a certain time, but it can be really impactful with helping you drill down onto what those anomalies are and how you can make the reductions. Pick your energy firm wisely. So check you're getting value for money, and if your tariff has dual rates, it may be prudent to carry out certain tasks during off-peak times. If we look at a concept of a village hall, for example, they may have a day rate and a night rate. That village hall may run a number of different programs in the day where people are renting the space. They're all contributing to how much they're consuming and their overall running costs. There may be activities where perhaps electricity or heating is needed more than others, and simply sometimes by reviewing when your contract's most expensive and swapping those activities around, that can really help with you reducing your overall running costs. Phantom energy. So what is phantom energy? Phantom energy is used by equipment that's plugged in, but it's not in active use. So if you think about in the case of in a home, for example, it could be that you've got your TV on standby, perhaps there's some sort of PlayStation or something like that in the home that's on standby. Anything like that is contributing to the phantom energy that we're talking about here. And it's big, and it can have an overall impact on how much you're spending as an organisation on your utilities, but also how much you're contributing to your carbon footprint as well. When you're looking at these sort of issues within your organisation, what I would try to bear in mind and then bring into the team meetings or discuss with the energy champions that you put in place is every organisation has a base load. So this is how much you're consuming before anything is turned on in the building itself. So this is just the standby base load usage. Anything that's left on unnecessarily is contributing to that base load. So any reductions you can make are going to make a big difference. So try having simple tips, like try having any computer peripherals, or it might even be things like kettles, whatever it is, connected to power strips. So when someone's leaving the building, you can just press one button and it cuts all the power off, and it will help you make a reduction. Control the temperature. It sounds like a really obvious piece of information, but you'd be shocked at how many organisations we visit where this is a common concern or something that people are really struggling with. And this is where you can really focus on how the energy champions can help you with this. If you bring everybody on board with what you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve it, people will be willing to look at things like, heating. Do we need this on? Do we need this on at this time? And can make real changes to how the behaviour of the people using the building is impacting the overall running costs. Just a piece to bear in mind, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning can count for up to 60% of energy costs. So it can make a big difference making that change. And here's some quick wins that hopefully this section gives you some ideas of things you could implement pretty easily with pretty low cost up front. But here's some quick wins of things to bear in mind as well. Only heat areas that are being used. So try and separate, certain areas with radiators being on in one area if that is the only isolated area where people are having an activity. Check the thermostats regularly. This could be something that you give to an energy champion to be responsible for. Check for drafts and if you can stop them. Monitor your energy usage. So I've already discussed looking at things like AMR meter readings. If you're struggling to get a smart meter at the moment, or perhaps you're in a location where it's really difficult to have signal, I strongly recommend taking meter readings at the start and or end of each month so you can keep a track of how much the building is consuming on a regular basis. And then deal with your base load, so switching off all non-essential equipment every day, which will make a big difference. So hopefully at this point, you now know what the key criteria and steps are to starting your journey to net zero. And you now have some tips of things that you can implement within your organization that are going to make a big difference to your overall energy costs and your journey to net zero. As always, if there's anything we can do to help you, whether it be to support you with your journey to net zero, perhaps you would like some support with us and having a chat on a one-on-one basis, please feel free to reach out to Kimberly Page. Her email address is here, and I will share examples of the slides and next steps shortly. But thank you so much, everyone. If you have any questions, please email us. We'd be happy to talk you through anything that you need some help with.